to call to order the December 8th Health and Environmental Protection Committee meeting here at 6 o'clock. First order of business is the approve the minutes of the September 8th, 2025 Health Committee meeting.
Motion to approve minutes from the 18th.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, the second item is a report on the preliminary scope of work for a long-range parks master plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with your indulgence, I think what we'll do, again, Ms. Jones and I are doing a duet, if you will, and we've actually taken both items, not only a preliminary scope of work for the master plan, but a report on current due diligence in forming a Parks Foundation. So it's in the same slide deck, and while we don't profess that we're going to have a very long meeting, I think we would both encourage any kind of feedback that y'all are willing to give because it's important to us. But I think with where we're at, the feedback may be limited and maybe something that you want to discern a little more, but I think we're going to be able to give you a pretty good picture of where we're at and maybe some next steps going forward. So if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and jump right in. We've already done the presentation overview. So with regard to a scope of work for a long-range master plan, we had a little bit of discussion about it, fundamental discussion at the last HEP committee meeting. But what we did is that we collaborated. You have in front of you a handout document that complements the slides, but in addition to a summary of what's going to be on the slides, we've also provided a detailed scope of work, which would consider two options really that I'm going to explain in a little more detail as we go along. But really just looking at our key objectives, a long-range master plan like this is coterminant with any other type of long-range planning that you're doing, whether it's comprehensive plans, transportation plans, long-range water and sewer plans. But the three key questions that you're trying to answer or try to produce in the final product is, what do you have in sort of an inventory or assessment? What do you want? Which is, what is your ultimate vision and strategy? And then how are you going to get there? And that becomes a little bit more strategic, because these plans, as I've been accustomed to it, typically has a 20-year time horizon, and within that 20-year time horizon, one of the deliverables should be a 5-year implementation strategy. And typically these types of plans, I don't know what your experience is, Catherine, but they should probably be updated every 10 years. But you keep rolling those 5-year implementation strategies, because obviously things change over time. But what's unique about parks and recreation master planning is that it's not only typical to have a very strong CIP or capital improvements program element, but in these types of plans, they usually address operations and maintenance and staffing, because as they say on the farm, if you buy a cow, you got to feed it and take care of it. And when you're talking about a very unique facilities and services that you have with parks, it's very typical to have this kind of analysis going into the product. Now, if you look at the two detailed options, I think there's a couple decision points that you might want to make. One that is key is, do we we want to have a scope of work in a plan that's going to involve broader partnerships. In other words, do we strictly want to focus on what we want to provide in the unincorporated area, or do we want to try to engage partners like our municipalities? It could be nonprofits, for example, the YMCA. I'm sure there's others out there I'm not that acquainted with, but churches or a number of nonprofits who maybe have facilities or programs. And then, of course, there may be the public schools, because I know in Georgia we have a very strong relationship with the countywide Board of Education or public school system, K-12, but or K-4 through 12 really. But we have very unique and good not only relationships, but with agreements with the school systems for facility use, whether it was their fields, whether it was some of the schools, because we had a pretty significant after-school program where the Board of Education allowed us to use classroom space. We get into agreements and pay teachers as sort of a side gig to help, where it's not just daycare, but you're actually trying to give the children an extended learning environment. So, that's I think that's a key thing we're going to have to decide if we're going to go through with this. Do we want to engage and embrace some in all of those partners? But it is something to think about, because at the end of the day, city residents are county residents too, and I know that county manager's office is very interested, despite no matter what you see, hear, or read, we want to have collaborative relationships with everybody who's involved in the community, including the municipalities. And I can stop at each slide if you have any questions or thoughts, or I can kind of keep going and we can save it till the end, whatever your preference is, but it's an interactive discussion. Now, your major tasks in the course of putting together a master plan, they're pretty typical. There's going to be kickoff meetings. There's going to be a period of analysis and assessment. But I think the good news is that the previous plan, which we know was kind of a bridge to do something like this, but the previous plan that you all worked with Clemson still has a lot of relevant, and I would say fresh data and recommendations that can flow into this document. But we also want to see if we have alignment with other plans we have, particularly the comprehensive plan, albeit we're doing a comprehensive plan update next year. If we were to do this plan, that would be good alignment with that process. And in the meantime, we're currently evaluating, which was budgeted this year, a trails plan. I think all of the RFPs have come in, and I think there's a meeting coming up to determine who we would like to talk with, or perhaps even negotiate with. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So then ultimately, I mentioned visioning and the strategy and having a strong CIP element. There's the funding piece, but these are all of those things that go into making the final product, which is in, wrong direction. But the tasks are very much linked to the deliverables. And the deliverables, there's going to be certain interim reporting periods by the consultant staff and stakeholders. Again, all being tied to the task, but one of the things you might want to be keyed into is how long is it going to take. Typically, it's going to be a 9 to 12 month period. Now, if we do broader stakeholder engagement, if we try to engage partners, there's a possibility it could go on a little longer, maybe up to 15 months. But even then, I really wouldn't foresee it taking longer than a year unless you have that experience that defies that statement. So, really, and you can examine the detailed scopes, but what we would ask you to consider, if you feel like as a committee that you would go forward to make some type of recommendation and referral to the council, to the manager's office during the budget process. One of the things that I believe that we could go out to do, which wouldn't conflict with procurement rules, we could talk to a couple of consultants who have broader experience in doing these kinds of plans and say, hey, we're looking at doing a traditional long-range transportation, or not transportation, sorry, Catherine, parks plan, and can you give us an example of a couple of clients that you've engaged with, and maybe what a recent cost history is, and then we have something to hang our head on. But I think Councilman Huckabee, if you remember in the ED committee, and I may have said it at the last HEB committee, just passing by, but the more defined that we are in setting a scope of work for this kind of product, the less the consultant has to guess at what we really want, and that way they're not hedging their price up a little bit when they're putting in a price proposal. But we can ask for some courtesy estimates for budgeting, but I think what we may want tonight, if it be so, if you have any comments or feedback or thoughts on how we should proceed forward with this, those would be welcome. Of course, we're getting into the holidays, and I imagine at the first of the year we'll be breaking out with new committee meetings across the board. You can have a little time to think about it then. In the meantime, we can try to get a range of courtesy estimates as to how much we think it's going to cost. But ultimately, you would need to decide whether you wanted to go forward with it or not. Of course, I personally said at the last meeting that I would be a strong advocate of it if funds were available. But I think what I'd rather do is, at least with this portion of the presentation, ask Catherine if she has any thoughts or comments.
I think you covered everything, and the only thing to note, and Tom mentioned this too, is there's some data that I think could be applicable out of the recent study that we did, and could be something that we provide a consultant with this process. It's just documents to help, because we did recently do the needs assessment. We did the public engagement through online surveys, public meetings. So, using that information, as we work on a long-range plan. I don't know that you would need to do that completely over unless there's some elements in here that we want to capture that would require some additional, more thorough public engagement, because we had good response out of the scientifically valid survey and those things. So that would be the only thing that I'd kind of add to it, but otherwise you covered everything.
So I think the key takeaways would be: are you interested in going forward? And if you are, we welcome any thoughts going forward on sharpening the saw, so to speak.
So I guess what we're asking is, are we interested in a 10 to 20 year CIP? And if we are, then we would like the staff to get as much preliminary work done as possible while they go interview a consultant, so the consultant understands the scope of the project and they know what they need to work on. The price should be less if they do a lot of the legwork up front. Is that pretty much it?
Kind of what I thought.
And
What is your vision as far as how many more parts, like if you had a Santa Claus, and you went up to Santa Claus and said, I want,
oh, don't give her Santa, she'll load the sleigh.
I will.
I mean,
really
I'm just
think,
curious.
no, I think so first of all, we don't work off of wants, we work off of needs. So I would go back to the needs assessment that was done, and/or if we needed to expand what was done in the first phase, to identify what our needs are, and then prepare a plan from there. You know, we need to just understand what is needed here in our county. And I think to Tom's point, talking about some collaboration efforts or meetings with municipalities and the nonprofits that offer and provide parks and recreation services, we don't want to duplicate the same thing that could be going on in a, you know, that's being satisfied, that's being met, and a need is being met in a particular area. And we did do some of that with this first phase. We had focus groups that had all the municipalities, the parks and recreation directors that were in a room. We included nonprofits like the YMCA and Springs Close Greenway. So we included those folks in some of those discussions, but that was an hour. I mean, it was just an hour-long, you know, focus group. So I think you've got to understand the need. You've got to understand and collaborate what else is going on in the county. I think you take into account growth. And those are elements that we really need a consultant and/or with some collaboration or partnership in our planning department to help paint that picture. And then that's where we can create the plan from there, you know, putting all that together. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
It does.
it's not an individual, it's not a personal decision as to what I want to see X, Y, and Z. I base decisions off of the data that's kind of presented, because if I go out and say, well, I want this built in this area, but we're not meeting X services to that area of the county, I've done a disservice to our taxpayers. So I would just say it would be based on the data, the growth models, so on and so forth. And then, I mean, I think too, you know, parks and recreation professionals, we speak into that to a degree, right? And me having experience in doing these plans in the past, you know, we knew that we were at capacity with certain facilities based on the programs and services we were offering. You know, so for example, we were heavy in athletics in the previous jurisdiction I worked for, and so we were at capacity. We were gonna have to start cutting off registration. We didn't have any more fields. We didn't have the staffing because of all the growth that was coming in. There wasn't a plan, truthfully. And so knowing that, also doing the needs assessment, we were able to speak into, hey, you know, we don't have any more fields to take in this number of participants, so maybe we need to consider building more fields. But we used the consultant to help us determine where that facility should go. So they took into account, again, growth, population, schools, you know, all of those things. And we started, they created us a map on where we needed to pursue that future land for future park. And, you know, then we started going and looking, you know, for property to acquire. But, you know, again, it's based off of needs, it's based off of growth and what planning and things can help us provide as well as a consultant. And then we can speak into what service levels are we offering now that we're at capacity. That's where we really kind of speak into where there could be some opportunity. But I think it's more of a collaborative effort. It's not just us saying, this is what we need. Does that make sense?
It does.
And that's important because, in my opinion, because, you know, we're not gonna be we're not gonna be the be-all to everybody. You know, Rock Hill and Fort Mill and others have, you know, robust service delivery, but, you know, I think Catherine's point about duplication, we don't want to be copying what each other is doing. We want to take advantage of each other's strengths and weaknesses. And even though it might be a loosely coupled system, the planning portion will help us plan for things that we're not duplicating and not wasting money on when somebody else may be the best provider of recreation service.
So
Like
you would-
Fort Mill is Parks and Recreation is completing their master plan currently. I think they're getting close to delivering a draft proposal to their council soon.
So are you looking for a motion tonight, so you know what direction to go in, or you just looking for feedback so that you can move forward with the next step of
Well,
firming up what it is we want? So you're gonna speak to
think feedback if there is any, because I feel like we need to collect a little bit more information to come back to you to make a motion where you feel comfortable in either, again, referring it back to council or the manager's office to take action in the course of budgeting.
I think we're gonna need a price before we go, because if they come back with some off the wall number, you know, the rest of the council's not gonna go with that, more than likely,
I
so.
think that I was just a little underwhelmed with the Clemson study, and I don't know, I was new then, I didn't know really what to expect from that study, but now that we kind of have a really good grasp of what we've got going on, I see that there was not a lot of need there. Things that you're talking about now, I would have thought we would have gotten out of that study. I mean, he gave us some good points, but there was just not, I mean, what do y'all think?
That study was a short-range study.
It
This
was.
a long-range, 10,
It was
20-year
focused
study.
on where we need to be to date. It did not account for future. It was to get us where we need to be
Yeah,
right
and
now
that's where
and
I
evaluate.
think that I was expecting that, and I was disappointed in it. I'm just being blunt, but anyway.
Yeah, I
I'm in a
thought it
blunt
was,
mood.
I thought it was short on information. I wasn't even on council at that point, but I also got the, you know, was told that there was budget limitations, and so they did the best that could be done with the budget. Yeah, I expected, hearing that it was a master plan, that there would have been a long range, but it was really more of a, here's what we need to
Maybe
get a
the
program
problem areas of
started.
what we have.
And it was a kind of a umbrella over here's in general, all the pieces you gotta have. Now we gotta dig down into all of them, figure it out, you know.
There's a launching pad.
It was, you know,
I mean-
and it did things that we don't have to redo, like staffing, trying to figure out the fees, those type of things were already covered. This now, you know, it told us what, activities we need and needs that we need. Now we just need to figure out where to put them, how to prioritize them. And-
Anything that around the lake is where you need it.
So
I mean,
think-
really,
I
that's
think
where
it
you
is.
go.
That kind of leads us into, I think, what the need is. And the need
Right.
is, when you look at the plan, and the plan paints a picture of what you need to do, then the price goes along with accomplishing.
That's right.
So you can't look at the price until you know what the scope of the project is. You see the scope of the project, you understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to make an investment in creating this. I think collaborating with municipalities makes a lot of sense too, so we're not duplicating, like you said. And we're looking at the growth trends of the county. There are some growth trends probably that are unexpected that are going to have to be taken into consideration. So, and I'm in favor of proceeding with, working on all the preliminary work that you need to do. We'll consult if you're ready to evaluate the project and give you, or the people who've already done this, the counties have already done this, give them ideas of what this might cost us.
Did Fort Mill reach out to y'all and see, kind of get an idea of what the county's plans? They
Look
could-
at me.
Now, they could
You
have
didn't ask
used,
anything?
they could have used the information from the last year's plan. They didn't reach out to us, but that information's on the website.
Right, but that didn't, again, it didn't say what we were planning in certain areas or what needs.
No,
were in
it just,
certain areas.
it spoke into needs, but
Yeah.
not specifically where those needs needed to be, but they could have used that needs
What was the
assessment.
master plan?
Mhm.
Actually, it spoke to Clover, it spoke to
Mhm.
agritourism, which is, or ag, which is the ag facility out in the western part of the county. It actually spoke specifically, we've already voted on some of this stuff.
It had some of it, but I was thinking like, you know, do we need new walking trails over here or new softball fields over there or those type of very specific needs in the different areas? I
I
think
don't
that's
think
what
we're
we're
into the
Yeah.
sports thing. Are we into the sports thing?
I don't know.
We're not, but,
We're
I
not
don't
right
think
now.
so.
well, so,
I mean, you've got TK with that big beautiful.
Yeah, they do a great part.
Yes.
Um,
And then you got, Fort Mill tends to do that, Rock Hill tends to do that.
that
There's
covers the
probably a,
east.
a need out there that's not being filled as much. I don't think it's sports.
Well, that's
I
what,
don't think everything is sports.
so that part of the county, Rock Hill, Fort Mill, TK is covered. But you go to the western and the southern part of the county and those needs aren't covered. And that's where we're getting into this needs assessment. I know Clover's reached out, in general and said, hey, what about collaboration? They need more fields. They can't necessarily, or don't want to build new fields and would like to form a partnership for some fields. I know York can use some also. And you've got down in Hickory Grove and down to McConnell's and all those places are gonna need. So I could see there being some active, in some areas it doesn't exist. I mean, again, I'm not trying to take over anybody and
Well, I think,
definitely don't want to
I think the benefit
get going too big.
of a plan like this is that,
It'll pinpoint all that.
yes, it'll identify gaps, it'll look globally, if you will, if York County is our planet, you know, what's being provided by everybody. And then if the forward thinking comes along with it, not only with vision, but, trying to identify where the population is gonna grow. I think all of that would come together in a document like this or a process like this.
I would hope so. That would be the kind of information I would want to see from it. And I would definitely want to coordinate these things with, because Fort Mill, TDK, Rocky are gonna have much different needs than other places and offer things to complement what they already provide. Um,
So,
So I would definitely want to see it. I wouldn't want to, like, derail our plans if they don't want to help.
right.
I don't want it to be absolutely tied to, well, if they're not going to be part of it, we can't do anything. We've got to have, it's got to be, I guess, self-reliant as much as possible.
Mhm. Well, I think with the information you've given us tonight, that kind of gives us a direction on where to go forward. And I think we can sharpen the saw a little bit, see if we can get some courtesy pricing through one method or another. But I think what we're looking for is, it's not necessarily cut and paste, we put thought into it, but it's the standard format for what this kind of plan looks like. And the communities that do this tend to be more successful in the long run. So I think we can bring you back some more information in a subsequent meeting, but we wanted to at least give you a snapshot, if nothing else, of what it looks like and what our thoughts are. And we appreciate what we've told you already, but if you have afterthoughts, we invite you to notify us until we get to the next committee meeting. We'll tighten
So
everything
you've
up.
got these two options, option one, option two.
Option-
What is your goal here with these? And do you
Option
wanna, should we study over this? You want us to study over this and because we can't do it right now.
Right, well, all of the above, but option two, I would probably think is more optimal if we're going to include, more stakeholders and look for opportunities of partnership with communities and nonprofits and schools and the like. That would be more ideal, I think, and then that helps us identify service gaps where we may come and fill them in, or we may establish arrangements or agreements with partners to fill a gap. One of the things we spoke about with the municipalities who are participating in our new funding scheme, we pledged to them that we want to be bigger partners with them. And county manager will correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's opportunity for capital improvements that can be made where you can have joint use agreements with York, Clover, McConnell's, whomever, that's what a plan like this can help address. But it doesn't ignore what you can do with the bigger municipalities either. And I think it's an opportunity to open up communication with them as well.
YMCA, Dog Nation,
Yeah.
a lot of it.
Is it gonna be a little more expensive than a unincorporated center, type of plan? Yeah, but I personally believe the benefits would outweigh the costs if we can go forward.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I see that would, reading through these, something doesn't add up on the task. After task 9 in option 1, it goes back to 4, 5, and 6, which doesn't show up in option 2. Anyway, but I would think that including the municipalities would only be like an additional task of coordination and engagement, maybe.
Yeah,
And, you know, and while it would add some cost to it, I would expect maybe 5 to 10%.
yeah, and again, like I said, we've got time to sharpen the saw, you know, because we wanted to meet your vision and the council's vision as well. That's why we didn't expect you to red line strike out or anything like that tonight. But, again, we wanted to give you an idea of what it looks like and what we need to do going forward, which I think you helped us with that.
I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I would like to see, I would like to leave the future of whoever it is with a cookbook of here's where we need to be going, here's the areas. That way as developments or opportunities appear, we know that we need something in a specific area, they can go ahead and we can discuss it, be partners on it. However it needs to be. So we don't miss out on lost opportunities, but also so we know where we're going. I don't like just driving around lost things.
Cool. And so what's the next steps?
Okay, we're going to try to get some courtesy pricing based on, you know, a broader scope of work. We can have conversations with a couple of consultants on, you know, what we're looking for, maybe what the bigger differences would be, more versus less engagement. But I think when we get that information, hearing what you're saying tonight, hearing any boomerang information you want to bring back to us in the interim, we can tighten things up. We can give what we think the price range is likely to be based on costs that we're hearing about that we'd like to confirm with other communities who've done something similar. And then I think, depending upon when you want to have the next meeting, if you want to start early out of the gate, we can do that, and maybe in January, and give you something you feel like you can sink your teeth into.
With the holidays and stuff, like, how long do you think they'll leave? February? Like, you should be able to get an answer by February, right?
Yeah,
Maybe get
February.
there early enough to get into the budget process and not.
Yeah, I mean, I may rely on the county manager a little bit. I personally would at least like to have some price range information in early January, if that's feasible. You know, I think, depending upon future feedback from you all after tonight and what you told us tonight, we can sharpen that saw a little bit more. You know, I don't think that it's a great deal of work. Maybe just put it into a single option, if you will, and put those things together and report back and say, hey, we think it's going to probably cost between X and Y, and based on what you've told us, you know, here's another tentative scope of work. Do you have any more thoughts? And if not, or if so, we tighten it up again, and we want to make sure that we want to stay within the budget calendar to make sure that, because I think that's going to be part of the next stage of budgeting. I think we're doing personnel and CIP right now, but then the other asks will probably be included as well. So I think we can get you something back fairly quick. It just depends on when you want
put y'all in a bind, so if you're gonna, you speak up now, if you forever hold your peace.
Yeah, we know what a good master plan looks like.
Okay. Well, let's go for mid-January.
Shall we?
Get this underway and, you know, that way if something crazy on the numbers comes up for some odd reason, we can get it whittled down before we get into the budget.
Y'all be up in the meeting, maybe at 4:30 before council meeting?
Whatever works for y'all.
I mean, we're already here, that's what I'm saying. Maybe most of our time here, that could be the year, yeah.
That's fine.
Maybe the second meeting of the month, just to give us a little flex.
Sure.
Okay, I think that,
That's fine.
all right, well,
I'll use my vacation time to come visit you guys.
It's typically the F and O night, but
Well.
that's what you want, we can move things around. We
They
have
just
to-
have to be done by 5:30. Yeah.
Correct, you have to be done by 5:30,
You can do
because
that.
F and O is at 5:30.
I love deadlines.
Okay.
well, with that, I know Catherine has some delightful information to share with you about Parks Foundation.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Just kind of flip over to the next slide. So at our last meeting, we talked about a foundation. And wanted just to kind of bring back to you some due diligence that we've worked on since that last meeting. And if you know, we mentioned it at the previous HEP meeting that there were draft bylaws that were formed right around the time that I started here. And they never really came to fruition, and they were written specifically for Catawba Bend Park Foundation. Some of you may be familiar with that. And I met recently and had some discussions with Michael Kendry, kind of regarding more of a countywide parks foundation as opposed to a park-specific foundation. And so, of course, that's, you know, certainly an option, and, you know, everything really with, you know, the bylaws, you know, we could revisit those draft bylaws. But since then, and part of kind of this due diligence, and attending conferences, we have been made aware of a association, it's a national association, for park foundations. And so something through, I mean, it is an association that's, you know, available to anybody wanting to start up a Parks Foundation or already has one established. But something that we've learned in this kind of due diligence, or I've learned in this due diligence process, as well as talking with other colleagues, is that it's highly recommended when you form a foundation that you have a clear purpose, that you define your initiatives, that's going to, you know, it's going to help you succeed. It's going to help you with the folks that are donating money or annual giving, to know what specific purposes or initiatives that you have, as well as developing memorandum of understanding between the agency, which would be York County Parks and Recreation, and the foundation. And I mentioned the National Association of Parks Foundation is because, and I mentioned this to Michael Kendry when we met, they help you develop your Parks Foundation. It is my opinion, a minimal fee. I think Michael could probably agree as well. And they have the staffing and the capacity to help us start it up. They provide training, not just to staff liaisons that work with the foundation, but they provide training to board members. They provide materials and training on annual giving, fundraisers, so on and so forth. And so we see a lot of benefit in joining this association, and we met with them as well. I had a call with their executive director following our national parks conference, and currently it's like $450 to join for the year. And if we were to pursue that, and we wanted to, if we wanted to move forward with establishing the foundation, they essentially could help us do that in roughly about 3 to 4 months time frame. And so, you know, I think it's just, we still would have to establish bylaws, they can assist with that. We obviously would work with Michael, in that regard, but, just see this as a huge, opportunity. You know, if we're wanting to proceed forward with the Parks Foundation. There's folks from Charleston County that have a Parks Foundation, they're part of this association. There's, several others in the state that have utilized this group. So I think it's a great opportunity for us if it's something that we want to move forward with. So, but again, I'll just reiterate, I listened to a session actually last week at a conference I was attending, and, you know, there's a Partners for Parks Foundation in Mecklenburg County. And a board member was there speaking part of the panel, and she was speaking of all the different initiatives that they have as part of their Parks Foundation. Like she was talking about how there's like 50 overall initiatives or separate projects. And she really advised to not do that. They're looking at condensing it, forming, you know, again, specific, you know, clear items that they're, you know, fundraising for, because people are more apt to giving when they know what they're giving for. And, you know, Charleston County was part of this panel as well, and they do nothing but use their foundation for access to their parks. They don't use it for capital. They completely did a overhaul of their foundation about 10 years ago, and their priority is to make sure that folks that can't afford access into their parks have it through scholarship or opportunities through their foundation. So that was just one of the key takeaways that I had, and you know, I think the foundation itself aligns with our Parks Master Plan, you know, the one that we completed last year, and it's an opportunity for us to establish, you know, funding mechanisms, investment strategies to help us fund whether it's capital projects or, you know, if we're wanting to address accessibility issues, you know, we can do that as well. I think that defining what we want the Parks Foundation to be and you know, will help us move forward. So I think at this point, I think we're just kind of wanting some feedback from you guys on kind of what we presented, if we're ready to kind of, you know, move forward with it, you know, that kind of thing.
Would it be are there pros and cons to having an overall countywide foundation as compared to an individual park or parks?
I think this is just from, you know, set-in sessions at the National Parks Conference, and then they had quite a few sessions at our joint North Carolina, South Carolina conference last week. And I think when you get to accounting, this is just, I certainly will defer to Tom if he has a different opinion, but I think with a county foundation, you have such a broad scope. And you're gonna have so many different initiatives, you know, to think about or people to give to, whereas if you have a Parks Foundation, you're narrowing in that scope. People are, you set up annual giving, you set up, you know, specific projects, you know, if you want it to go towards playgrounds or you want it to go towards parks, you just, I think you're narrowing in on it to a degree. Does that make sense? As opposed to if you have a county-wide, what are you establishing or raising funds for? Is it animals, or is it for libraries, or is it for roads? You know, it's just, I think it's.
So I had the same question that Annie had, because I was on the board years ago with Pleasant Foundation Carolinas, and it was called, I forgot what it was called before, it was Foundation Carolinas, but anyway, same question. Should we have a York County Foundation, and you have sub-reach of a Parks Foundation, a Trails Foundation, a Economic Development Foundation? You have all these foundations. You've got not-for-profits in York County that don't have a foundation, like the school district. The Rockwell School District has a foundation. It's got lots of entities. We can be part of that. I would suggest that. I think we should be independent. But you have subcategories, and they're actually foundations. They're foundations of the parents. You have one 503C, and you have everybody else that's under it. So all the needs that we have cascading into the future have a foundation that falls I personally think that's something to consider. You know, I went online, read a little bit today before the meeting, but, I think you end up creating, you're gonna have to create multiple foundations that have multiple accounting requirements and auditing requirements, things of this nature. Still accomplish the same thing you want to do, you still can have as many categories as you want to give to, but you've got different types of foundations you create under the umbrella.
Well, I think, in my opinion, if you go to a structure like that, you have to put a lot of thought in how you would set it up, but then sell it too, because in my experience, there's a lot of distrust of government today, and that sometimes affects the willingness to give. But if you were to set up a broader foundation, maybe with, we'll say, being very, very opinionated here, maybe things that are more attractive to give to. People don't mind contributing to firemen or fire services, for example, or parks, or animal services. Now, when you get into general services or property-related services like roads or something like that, they're going to hold their nose to it. But I think if you go to a broader structure, you've got to think very hard about how you're going to do it and how you're going to sell it. Because I think, and I agree, for the sake of efficiency, it's a lot more seamless to have one umbrella. But I think if with the kinds of robust financing and accounting structures that we have here, even with separate foundations, I think we could still manage it and be accountable to the citizens or the donors who give to it, even though there might be something of a 501 element to it.
So this would be similar to the impact fee. So we have 4 school districts that collect impact fees, but it's all paid out from York County. Maybe what is a consideration, Foundation of the Carolinas is the largest foundation there is in the Carolinas, to my knowledge. And I don't know how many entities host their money with them. They identify it as their foundation, but the money is housed with the Foundation of the Carolinas. Maybe just interview them and see how that's managed, how everybody keeps their own identity. The York County Parks Foundation would have an identity under the York County Foundation, as would any other, all that you mentioned, as far as when you get to fire or EMS or whatever you want to get to.
I think it's important to remember, though, the task for this committee is specific to parks. So I think the foundation piece, I would love for Michael Kendrick speaking on this if possible. We're talking about dipping our toes into a parks foundation. So I think Councilmember Litton's original question was actually different than what you answered, Catherine.
It was quite different.
Yeah, so he was asking if this should be specific to one individual park versus all parks. And I think our answer would be, we'd rather be for all parks. I think that's kind of how Catherine answered it. One example of why is we've created the mechanics for the Catawba Bend Foundation. It just was never seeded. So actually part of this is us unwinding all the paperwork for that, because for whatever reason, I don't know why, because I wasn't here with the script, it never got seeded. And so we think the opportunities to create a Parks Foundation. Does council someday say we want these other foundations? Sure, but I think under the context of tonight, we're looking for feedback on the Parks Foundation. Michael, did you want to speak to the
I think that
paperwork?
thank you, Josh. I think that very accurately summarizes where we are. The concept was to support all parks in general, not just one, even though it's our largest, not just one park. And if that concept is something the committee is in favor of, we can certainly bring back more detail what that would mean through this, either this foundation or through a private firm helping us draft new bylaws and corporation documents. But the concept was to just allow the foundation to support all our parks.
I think we're in agreement on that, right?
Yeah. Well, and I guess if we decided to go into a bigger overall foundation for the county, it somehow roll under the umbrella that's being created without holding this process up, trying to get the next process
Just
going.
making the recommendation, like, and just making the recommendation, because it's gonna go to council.
Right, and in your recommendation to council, you could say, we think we should look at a broader, as, you know, as a full council later on, but that wouldn't be in the purview of this committee.
Right. So your overall parks foundation as compared to an individual park, you know, we talked about the foundations, as they're bigger, people don't want to necessarily give to them. So would that apply on a parks level also? Like, people may want to give their funds directly for one park, and even though it's designated to that park, people always go, well, I know they're siphoning that money off to go wherever. And so would they be, I'm just, should we get into a micro level, or is that
Well,
getting too
I could see
micro?
a huge portion of money going to Miracle Park. I mean, that would be, I'm sure that there are tons of people out there that would love to support that park. So would it not be where they could give to a specific?
We had a foundation in Georgia, I mean, we were getting hundreds or thousands or millions of dollars or anything, but, you know, county was in charge of managing the money. And, you know, we would have, occasional restricted giving to improve a tennis court or to give scholarships to kids, low-income kids, so, but that's kind of the point I was making earlier, right? Now, of course, there might be a threshold where it gladly would be too big for the county to manage, and you're talking about a different kind of organization. Which provokes me to ask, I didn't think of it until now, is there a traditional community foundation here in York County or with Rock Hill?
Yeah, Foundation of the Carolinas, that is.
That is it, okay, I see.
Yeah, and I think I served on the foundation board at Winthrop for years, and yeah, the donor having a passion for something and then give specific to that, or give to the discretionary fund, the county manager, or whatever, for you, knowing that you don't have much discretion in your budget, so you get things.
Well, and I think, you know, from listening and inquiring with other park foundations that are just in the state of South Carolina, you can have, you know, designated projects, or you can have different categories that you can designate those funds to. And you've got a board, right? You have board members, that represent their citizens. So they're the ones that are making the decisions on how the money's spent. We're maybe providing them information of what our CIP looks like, what projects we have coming down the pipeline, you know, if there's accessibility or there's scholarship for programs, you know, and then, you know, others say that they do have just a general category that if somebody just wants to give, and typically that's where the annual giving goes.
Restricted and unrestricted.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, maybe you're short 10 grand on a particular project for you to move forward, you can pull, the board can decide. This isn't a staff decision. The board would make the recommendation or the vote to move those funds to go to a certain project.
Now, Betty triggered another question for me. Would the municipalities be in this foundation, or would it just be purely for county parks?
It would be a county parks foundation for county parks.
Rock Hill has their own parks foundation, I don't know about Fort Mill and Kitty Cay.
I didn't really think about it.
I'm not aware that they do.
I don't know how our collaborations with municipalities go sometimes, so I didn't know if adding a couple people from everybody onto that.
Well, and you know, again, through this process, you develop the structure of the Fairview Foundation
Right.
too. You know, within your bylaws,
Right.
what funds can be used for, et cetera, et cetera.
To answer the question, I'm in favor of starting the Parks Foundation.
If y'all think it's beneficial and the benefits outweigh the effort to do it.
And I think there's very little risk or financial cost in joining this organization. Is it an annual subscription?
Correct.
And I recall you telling me that it has a lot of, offers a lot of technical assistance and products that we could use if we, templates for various kinds of documents.
But you don't really need our consent for that, do you? It's $450 annual, right? Right? That makes sense for you to join the foundation, for sure.
And Catherine, one question I think I heard there was, in terms of trails, would that be something you would recommend as part of a Parks Foundation or is that?
Absolutely.
Okay, because to me, a trail is a park.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I heard that question once, I don't know if Pat could, but I'll have to time with that.
Right now, we're discussing economic development, but
Right.
I think trails are a part of our master plan.
I mean, trails are all in our parks. I think if we're to establish, some large trail system, who would maintain it?
And I think it would blend into what we, Parks Foundation would blend in well, with corporate giving too.
Okay. I support it.
Understand?
That's all we
Do we
have.
need a motion?
John, we just need a motion to adjourn.
Is that it?
A motion on the
I
foundation.
don't think we need a motion. I think we,
I mean, y'all are still,
yeah.
I mean, I think if I guess if you guys need us to bring anything back to you at the next meeting,
I'd like to know more about the structure of the foundation of the Carolinas. Because we're gonna do this, I know we already had that one drafted up, it was going to get off in, but if it makes sense to have a structure where you can create other sub-foundations below it, we ought to know that now going in. That's part of the structure.
yeah, I think, we explored using Foundation of the Carolinas, for our financial component when I pursued starting a foundation previously. And there are others in the area that use Foundation of the Carolinas from the financial component and keep it completely separate. So I think that would just be some conversations that
That's right.
we can have here at how we want to do that as we move
I
forward.
mean, we may have municipalities in the county that don't want to go through the work of creating a foundation and house their money in a foundation under a subcategory.
Well, thank you for coming on a cold night. It's very helpful to us and we hope for you.
are y'all gonna bring back, the bylaws and the setup for this foundation for the next meeting? Is that where will come to us before we send it off to council?
I think that may be a longer meeting.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to pursue the National Association of Park Foundation, I mean, and/or I'm not sure Michael Kendrick's timeframe either on getting those established, but.
I didn't know if y'all could like just white out Catawba being and write in York County, if it was that close to being the
I
same.
think it would help if we had conversations with NAPF and as they got to know us a little bit better, they could give us better advice. Don't you think?
Yeah, and/or probably meeting with Michael to just determine that timeline. I think January would probably be too quick of a timeline,
I'm just
yeah,
curious
but,
what was coming back and when it might be.
yeah, I think y'all just speak into what you would like for us to bring back to you, and you can certainly do that. So if I'm hearing bylaws, like draft bylaws,
I assume that's what we're going on.
but it would be later than January.
Yeah, and it might be a template like we discussed tonight with the scopes of work for the master plans, because you'll want to look at it and you may have, again, afterthoughts and ideas about what you would want to put in the template. But it can be an ongoing conversation, but keeping the ball rolling is a good idea.
And it'll evolve in time. You know, somebody's going to do this one and probably look for a park. Could be a bakery somewhere.
Sure, no.
Yeah. And once you organize something like this, you get more easy to get it, you know?
Yeah.
You got structure, nobody's going to do it. Okay.
We have, any executive session?
No, sir.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?